What if the quietest man in the quarters carried within him a storm, waiting to break? What if the very weapons forged to protect the masters became the tools of the enslaved? Louisiana, 1861. The nation was splitting open like old wood, the smell of war thick in the air. Newspapers spoke of secession, of states tearing themselves away from the Union, of muskets and bayonets being gathered for the fight that everyone knew was coming. In the great plantation houses along the Mississippi, masters boasted of honor and destiny, raising their glasses to the Confederacy that had not yet been born. They believed their world eternal, cotton endless, obedience certain. But in the quarters, silence ruled. Fields still stretched in endless rows, whips still cracked, and prayers still floated up against an iron sky. He was not the loudest, nor the most feared, nor the most broken. He worked with steady hands, his face unreadable, his voice low. To the overseer, he was a body, nothing more, muscle for the harvest. To his friends, he was a man who remembered every insult, every lash, and stored them like sparks hidden in dry grass. To the masters, he was invisible. But Benjamin had learned something dangerous. He had seen the armory in the big house, stocked with rifles meant for militia drills. He had watched where the keys were kept, how the master's son grew careless in his pride. He had studied the patterns of locks, the weight of doors, the arrogance of those who believed no slave would dare to touch steel. And so Benjamin's silence was not surrender. It was preparation. The storm was already gathering. The year was 1861, and Louisiana pulsed with unease. In January, the state had torn itself from the Union, joining the swelling tide of secession. By spring, the Mississippi carried more than cotton and sugar. It carried rumors of war. Steamboats choked the levees of New Orleans, their decks stacked with bales bound for markets that might soon collapse, while young men in gray militia coats drilled in courthouse yards, muskets glinting under the southern sun. Masters toasted to a Confederacy not yet born, convinced that war would preserve the world they had built upon chained backs. South of the city, plantations stretched like empires along the river, their wealth carved from sugar cane's sweet poison and cotton's white tide. The Rutledge estate was one of these, its white-pillared house rising from damp soil, its verandas draped in ferns, its parlor piano polished until it gleamed like a shrine. Behind it, the sugar house dominated the horizon. Iron rollers, boiling kettles, smoke rising in plumes that darkened the sky. Near the levee stood the cotton gin and press, proof that greed could master more than one harvest. Lined in a row, like mute witnesses, the slave cabins squatted on the lane, each door facing the same direction, each mouth ordered shut. And above them all loomed the overseer's cottage, his whip ready to answer any sound that grew too bold. Benjamin was born on this ground. His life was measured not in years, but in scars, thin white seams across his back, the knot in his shoulder from a fall with a cane bundle, the grief that hollowed him when fever claimed his wife, Eliza, and the baby she carried. Silence became his armor. He labored where told, harvest, levee, sugar house. Yet his hands grew deft with gears and levers, his patience with tools noticed even by the overseer. iron spoke to him. He learned its temper, its warning tremors, and in iron he began to sense possibility. Overseer Coyle ruled with cruelty disguised as order. His ledger counted hours and rations as debts. His whip balanced them when he judged accounts unsettled. A hymn might drift from the mistress's parlor on Sundays, her voice soft as prayer. But the same lips ordered lashes on Monday, and her Bible gilded every cruelty with scripture. To her, Benjamin was less than property. He was silence itself, invisible unless commanded. Louisiana law wrapped around the quarters like iron bands. The Code Noir forbade the enslaved from bearing arms. Parish patrols rode the roads at night, lanterns swinging, pistols on hips, ready to lash or chain anyone found without a pass. Even a cane knife could be seized as proof of rebellion. The law decreed obedience, and obedience was enforced with terror. Yet war was coming, and the big house prepared itself. The master's eldest, Thomas, returned from New Orleans in militia uniform, his pride loud, his caution none. An upstairs room became the armory. Racks filled with muskets, powder kegs stacked neat, crates of percussion caps tucked into drawers. Keys dangled carelessly, sometimes beside the master's desk, sometimes in Thomas's waistcoat pocket, sometimes forgotten on a table after a drink. Drills filled the yard, Thomas and his friends barking commands, clumsy with their rifles, boastful of their cause. Benjamin watched without seeming to watch. Carrying water, polishing brass, splitting wood nearby, he studied the rhythm of locks, the sound of bolts sliding, the weight of doors. He noted which boys dropped a musket when drunk, which left powder open on the table, and which treated weapons as toys. His silence held all these details, each stored, like nails, in a carpenter's pouch. At night, the quarters sang in low voices. Psalms bent grief into endurance, folding memory of lost lands into rhythm that steadied hands for tomorrow's work. Around the fire, children's stomachs ached, women mended, and men rubbed wrists raw from rope. Benjamin sat apart, listening, sorting each detail he carried, the map of the plantation, the carelessness of masters, the arrogance of militia boys. The law said his hands could never touch a musket, but he had already held the idea of one, and that idea was sharper than iron. And so the world arranged itself in him. River, armory, overseer, patrols. Each is a danger. Each is a key. Where others saw walls, Benjamin began to see doors. The plantation lived on repetition. Long days carved into the backs of the enslaved. Nights pressed flat beneath silence. Overseer Coyle's whistle shrieked at dawn, and bodies rose from the cabins before the mist had even lifted from the cane fields. Men swung machetes until their palms split. Women bound heavy bundles. Children gathered scraps of stalks, all while the sun bore down with an unrelenting hand. Hunger lingered at their ribs, and the lash trailed them like a shadow. Benjamin moved among them quietly, steady and unyielding. He bent to his tasks when commanded, carried water, and repaired a broken press with the same hands that had once cradled his wife before fever took her. But he never complained, never lifted his eyes too high. Silence kept him alive, and silence gave him space to think. He had learned that survival was not always obedience. Sometimes it was patience. The daily humiliations carved themselves into him. Thomas Rutledge, proud in his new militia uniform, strutted across the yard with musket slung carelessly on his shoulder. He mocked the enslaved with drills, forcing them to march in lines like soldiers, laughing when they stumbled, striking them with the butt of his weapon if they faltered. His cruelty was not discipline. It was amusement. Each jeer, each strike, each drunken boast sank into Benjamin like lead. Children of the Rutledge household mirrored their elders' contempt. They taunted Benjamin when he carried wood, calling him mule, beast, shadow. He absorbed their laughter in silence, but every insult was stored in the same hidden ledger where he had been collecting injuries for years. The ledger was almost full. At night, the quarters became a place of murmured endurance. The fires burned low, and songs rose, songs that bent grief into survival, weaving fragments of Africa into the dark Louisiana air. Men whispered of Union soldiers, of a president across the horizon who spoke of emancipation, though none could be sure if such words would ever touch the banks of the Mississippi. Some prayed, some planned, most simply endured. Children of the Rutledge household mirrored their elders' contempt. They taunted Benjamin when he carried wood, calling him mule, beast, shadow. He absorbed their laughter in silence, but every insult was stored in the same hidden ledger where he had been collecting injuries for years. The ledger was almost full. At night, the quarters became a place of murmured endurance. The fires burned low, and songs rose, songs that bent grief into survival, weaving fragments of Africa into the dark Louisiana air. Men whispered of Union soldiers, of a president across the horizon who spoke of emancipation, though none could be sure if such words would ever touch the banks of the Mississippi. Some prayed, some planned, most simply endured. Benjamin listened, but he did more than listen. He watched how despair dulled his friends' eyes, how hope was a thin flame in their voices. He thought of the armory above the parlor, of the rows of rifles sweeping behind locked doors. He thought of the militia boys' drunken arrogance, of the keys carelessly tossed aside. He thought of the law that forbade the enslaved from holding even a cane knife at night, yet allowed masters to pile muskets like grain. Patience is dry timber, and every lash is a spark. The catalyst came on a night in May. The big house was alive, with music and drink. Thomas celebrating the Confederacy's first victories with his companions, their boots stomping on polished floors, their laughter rising above the Mississippi's steady pulse. The armory door was left unlocked in their haste, rifles leaning against the wall like forgotten sentries. Powder kegs stood exposed. Lanterns smoked in the corners. Pride had made them careless. Benjamin saw this, carrying trays from the kitchen, fetching water from the well. His eyes caught the shadow of that open door. He lowered his gaze quickly, as if it did not matter. But the image seared itself into him. Weapons waiting, arrogance guarding nothing. From that night, his plan sharpened. He began to map the plantation, not as a prisoner, but as a strategist. He marked the patrol routes of the parish guards, noted the hours when Coyle's lantern flickered out, and memorized the creak of the armory stairs. He knew which friends in the quarters could be trusted. Men who had lost wives, mothers, children to the lash, who carried their grief like hidden fire. At night, he spoke to them in fragments, never in whole sentences. A word here, a glance there. Keys river, weapons. They understood. The risk was unspeakable. To be caught was to be hanged, or burned, or broken before the others as a warning. The law demanded it. Every rebellion, every whisper of resistance in Louisiana's history had been answered with fury. Yet Benjamin knew that silence was its own kind of death. Better to risk the rope than to wither slowly in the cane fields, waiting for a freedom that might never come. Weeks passed. His friends grew restless, their whispers sharper. Some doubted, asking, "What good are muskets against the world?" Benjamin answered not with words, but with resolve. He showed them how to move in shadow, how to carry themselves as if nothing stirred within them. He taught them patience, not obedience, but patience as a weapon. The quarters became tinder, dry with waiting. Overseer Coyle struck harder, as if he sensed something shifting beneath the silence. But cruelty only fanned the ember. Every lash, every insult, every day of forced labor was another strike of flint. The night chosen was one of arrogance. The Rutledges planned another gathering, militia officers and neighbors feasting on roasted hog, boasting of Confederate glory. Lanterns would burn bright, music would spill across the yard, and wine would loosen every tongue. Pride would make them blind again. Benjamin's friends waited, their breaths tight, their bodies taut as bowstrings. The plan was simple in shape, but perilous in execution. Slip into the big house while chaos reigned. Unlock the armory and arm themselves before the night ended. No fire, no open violence yet, only the gathering of steel into hands that had been forbidden to hold it. The quarters whispered prayers. Some begged the Lord for protection. Others begged for vengeance. Benjamin asked for nothing. He carried silence in his chest, like a blade. The big house prepared for its feast, unaware that its own weapons would soon slip into the hands of those it sought to control. Can Benjamin stay patient, invisible, move toward the moment when silence would break? The night of the feast came thick with heat. Lanterns burned along the veranda of the big house, their flames dancing against the dark, while music and laughter spilled across the yard. Inside, militiamen in gray coats raised goblets high, their voices hoarse with drink and boasting. "The Confederacy is iron," Thomas Rutledge shouted, slamming his musket's butt to the floor. "And the North will bend before it." The room roared approval. None of them noticed the figure moving quietly in the shadows. Benjamin waited until the laughter swelled, until boots stamped in rhythm and glasses clinked again. Then he slipped from the kitchen corridor, his body pressed close to the plastered wall. He moved without hesitation. Each step rehearsed in silence over countless nights. The stairs to the armory creaked, but the music below drowned them out. His hand closed around the latch, and the door swung open. The smell of oil and powder filled his lungs. Rows of muskets gleamed in lantern light, lined like soldiers waiting for orders. Powder kegs, stacked neatly in the corner, hummed with danger. For a moment, Benjamin stood still, staring at the forbidden room, the very heart of the master's power. Then he stepped inside. One by one, he lifted the rifles, passing them through the window to the waiting hands of his friends below. Faces emerged from shadow. Samuel, with eyes hardened by years of lashings. Ruth's eldest son, silent and resolute. Two younger men, whose scars shone pale under the moonlight. They received each weapon with trembling hands, not from fear, but from the weight of history being broken. Keys jingled at Benjamin's waist, stolen hours earlier. when Thomas, drunk and careless, left them on the billiard table. Locks that had guarded death for centuries gave way in seconds. He worked quickly, his silence now steady as thunder far away. Within minutes, the racks were empty, the crates lighter, the weapons gone from the master's reach. Below, in the cane field's darkness, the rifles were hidden in bundles of stalks, in carts waiting by the levee, in places no overseer would think to look until morning. Then, footsteps, heavy, unsteady, climbing the stairs. Benjamin froze. Thomas Rutledge appeared in the doorway, face flushed with wine, musket still slung across his back. For a breath, their eyes met. Thomas opened his mouth, but no word escaped before Benjamin swung the butt of a rifle into his jaw. The young man crumpled without a sound, his body collapsing onto the polished floor. Benjamin did not linger. He stepped past him, calm, as if leaving behind only another piece of broken furniture. The feast below continued, laughter ringing out as though nothing had shifted. But in the night air, beyond the reach of lantern light, men and women now held weapons in their hands. Steel gleamed where only calloused palms had been before. For the first time, the quarters were armed. Benjamin stepped into the shadows, vanishing into the silence he had carried all his life. The big house still believed itself eternal, but the rifles had slipped from their walls, and in the darkness, silence had become rebellion. Morning broke over the Mississippi with a thick veil of mist. The Rutledge plantation stirred slowly, its halls heavy with the sourness of wine and the groans of militiamen nursing swollen heads. Overseer Coyle barked his orders as usual, unaware that the night had already shifted the balance of the ground beneath him. To the master and his son, the rifles in the upstairs armory still seemed secure, guarded by walls and locks. They did not yet know that their weapons had already slipped beyond their reach. In the quarters, however, whispers ran like fire through dry grass, beneath bundles of cane stalks, beneath false floors and wagons, beneath blankets folded as if for travel. Muskets now lay hidden. Powder horns and cartridges passed hand to hand, secret as breath. Men who had never touched steel in freedom now cradled rifles against their chests in the dark. Women pressed their fingers to the barrels, whispering prayers into the cold iron, as if baptizing the weapons with their hope. Benjamin's name was not spoken loudly, but all knew. He had been seen slipping into the shadows, carrying nothing, yet leaving behind an emptiness in the armory. He had struck Thomas Rutledge down without killing him, a blow delivered with silence rather than fire. That silence carried weight. It was not only the absence of sound, it was the presence of defiance. The plantation shifted uneasily in the days that followed. Overseer Coyle sensed something unspoken, lashing harder, searching cabins, demanding answers. He found nothing. The rifles remained hidden, scattered like seeds across the fields. Thomas bore a dark bruise along his jaw, but said little of the man who had felled him. Perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of fear. Pride demanded silence, and silence became Benjamin's shield. What the enslaved would do with the weapons remained uncertain. Some urged patience, whispering that the Union Army was coming, that freedom might march down the river with its blue coats and bugles. Others burned with urgency, longing to rise immediately, to strike overseers and masters, to see the big house fall in flames. Whispered to both camps. They were more than tools of war. They were symbols that chains could be broken. Benjamin himself vanished into rumor. Some said he slipped north along the river, seeking Union lines. Others swore he stayed close, moving at night between plantations, teaching others how to hide powder, how to use the musket's ramrod, how to turn silence into strategy. Overseers whispered that he had been killed and dumped in the river. The quarters never believed it. They said he walked still, carrying silence like a cloak. Years later, when the war ended and freedom was declared, fragments of his story survived. A rusted musket found in the rafters of a cabin, a powder horn carved with the initials B.R., songs that children sang, their lyrics bent into parable, of a man who stole thunder from the big house and placed it in the hands of the broken. But the official ledgers tell nothing. In the master's books, Benjamin's name was struck through, replaced by the words missing property. Like so many others, he was erased by ink, as if silence could blot out defiance. History remembered battles and generals, proclamations and treaties, but not the night a man in Louisiana turned the master's weapons into the people's fire. And so his story survives only in shadow, a whisper among ruins, a rusted rifle beneath floorboards. A question that will not rest. Did Benjamin vanish into the river or into freedom? Or does he still walk the fields, carrying silence like a loaded gun?